Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning, depending on where you are in the world. I hope that you had a productive day in our many breakout sessions. I really loved seeing the number of people in each space that I went into, and I enjoyed the fun conversations we were having in the Wonder networking space. And as I said earlier, I confess to being a little late to a session because of a great conversation, and that almost makes it feel like the days of in-person meetings. Almost, we're getting there, not quite. Thank you for being here with us. Our plenary today honors Dr. Peter Fox and the incredible contributions he has made to this community. In my first weeks and months with ESIP, it was immediately apparent to me that Peter was a legend and someone I should get to know right away. I am so grateful for the early conversations we had and the wisdom and the candor and the advice he shared with me. I am touched that some of Peter's family members are able to join us today to witness the impact he had on this field and the lives of so many people. In true ESIP fashion, the idea for this plenary came up from the community and specifically from Peter's students. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Ahmed Elish, who will lead this session. Ahmed is a computer and data scientist, currently a doctoral student at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. His research interests include geoinformatics, complex systems, and computational linguistics. His research experience involves applying network and data science methods to problems in mineralogy, paleontology, and microbiology. So in short, I'm pretty sure he worked pretty closely with Peter. Ahmed, I am grateful for your leadership of this session, and I'm happy to turn things over to you.
Thank you very much, Susan. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, and a good day to you all. I'd like to thank you all for being here and to thank ESIP folks for helping put this session together and for their support throughout. It goes without saying that in the loss of Peter Fox, many of us lost a friend and a colleague, an advisor and mentor, and a very active member of several scientific and research communities. A member whose many contributions consistently pushed the conversation and the science forward, often challenging the status quo in favor of innovation, and always doing that in a collegial and collaborative manner. I've personally had the privilege of knowing Peter for a significant period of time in my life. And I will say that working under him on my PhD was incredibly rewarding. Challenging at times, sure, but always rewarding and always fulfilling. I don't think I will ever be involved in as many projects simultaneously as I had been in the past few years, but I will always carry the experience of having been there and having made it through with me. One thing I will miss is how he would not let you sell yourself short. He had a talent for detecting good efforts and providing subtle guidance to let the ideas naturally develop rather than micromanaging or intervening. He encouraged an open-minded exploration of ideas, especially when in multidisciplinary settings and groups. He espoused a strong work ethic and an approach of confidence to solving problems. Work like you've already succeeded. And it is in this spirit today that we get to hear about and reflect on some of the influence that his work and the group that his network of collaborators has had. Before we begin with our distinguished speakers, I'd like to briefly introduce the idea of X-informatics. I'm sure everyone has read the description of the session twice. Simply put, it is the study of the core concepts from various domain-specific informatics disciplines, such as information models, use case design, semiotics, information visualization, discovery and integration, quality and bias, among others. It is naturally an interdisciplinary and pursuit, and it is inextricably linked to the desire to utilize data and information in conducting research in various domains. Given that nature, I'm hoping that everyone here will learn something useful from our speakers today. In fact, after hearing from our speakers, I would like everyone to, in the audience, to jump onto a breakout room. We'll talk about that when our speakers are through, and share your knowledge. Today we're talking about informatics, and so we're typically at the interface between data science and one or more of the natural sciences. And I'm assuming we have a distribution of specializations in the audience. And so In the breakout sessions, we're looking for how one side can benefit the other. This is in terms of current science and research problems, new and upcoming technologies and innovations, collaborations, etc. And with that, I am very, very glad to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Robert Hazen. Dr. Hazen is senior scientist at the Carnegie Institution for Science, a mineralogist who in 2015 was mesmerized by Peter Fox's vision of data-driven discovery. In the past 6 years, having worked closely with Peter and his students, Hazen and his group are attempting to usher in an era or a new era of mineral informatics. They have been constructing large data resources, applying methods of analysis and visualization in an effort to understand the diversity and distribution of minerals through space and time on Earth and other worlds. Bob will tell you about their significant findings and how the way that they do their science has changed.
Thank you so much, Ahmed. I'm just going to share my screen. And here we go. Wow, I'll tell you, it is such a privilege and also responsibility to talk in a section that honors Peter Fox. Peter was a dear colleague. He was an admired and respected mentor. He was a friend. And it's remarkable to me the extent to which he has influenced and changed my career and the career of all my early career colleagues. Now, I first met Peter about 10 years ago, and the context was not one of me reaching out to him. I should tell you that story. I was asked to lead a scientific effort called the Deep Carbon Observatory, sponsored primarily by the Sloan Foundation. It was a 10-year effort that ultimately involved more than 1,200 scientists in 55 countries. We had hundreds of millions of dollars in funding with core funding from the Sloan Foundation. But those funds did not come unattached. There were some provisos. And first and foremost amongst those was the requirement that we have a data science team. And the requirement by the Sloan Foundation was that that data science team would be based at RPI and would be led by Peter Fox. Well, 10 years ago, I was kind of a data science dummy. I really hadn't ever worked in that. And you'll see why, because I'm a mineralogist. And at that point, mineralogy was simply not embracing the idea of data-driven discovery. So what I thought naively at the time was, oh, good, we'll have somebody to help us curate our databases and make sure that they're put in a repository where they can be accessible if we need them in the future, and sort of like somebody cataloging our library. And I know you've probably all heard people who think that way, because it's if you're not in data science, that's the way you think. But Peter had a different idea in mind, and he didn't beat us over the head, but he gradually introduced us to a different way of thinking. And that different way was that we would be able to look at data as a means of discovery, as a pathway to thinking about our science in a totally new, multidisciplinary, integrated way. Thinking about multidimensional data, thinking about ways of analysis and visualization that would lead us in new directions. And so we started this wonderful series of collaborations with early career scientists, members of the Tetherless World constellation, Ahmed and Marshall and Anirudh and Feifei and others, who would sit down with us side by side, and over the last 6 to 8 years, begin a series of studies in mineralogy that have transformed the field. And it wasn't just the early career scientists at RPI, it's the fact that they were able to work so incredibly effectively with other scientists, some of them at my own institution, Carnegie Institution, like Shauna Morrison, who has embraced this, and this is leading her career as an early career scientist, many other scientists from around the country and indeed around the world. It is astonishing how this is expanded. And so our RPI colleagues would sit with us. We had many, many datathons. We had many gatherings of people, some virtual over the last year and a half. And before that, we met in person, and starting in August, I think we're going to start doing this again. And making discoveries by having disciplined scientists sitting side by side with the data scientists and saying, what are our problems? How can we solve it? It's the most dynamic, creative endeavors that I've ever been part of. And in a typical 2-day datathon, we'll have a half a dozen new papers launched, and many of those within a year will be published. This is a really remarkable way of doing science that I love. Now, this effort has expanded. Because of Peter and his colleagues, we have this idea for the deep time data-driven discovery. This is a spin-off of the Deep Carbon Observatory and the Alfred P. Sloan funding. This is a core group now, about 220 collaborators in 69 institutions, 12 countries, a whole variety of people in biology and geology and planetary science and so forth, who are interested in problems relating to Earth's evolution through 4.5 billion years. So deep time is part of this. And where is Peter? Well, he was directly at the center of this. Those little blue nodes are data scientists and RPI. This network diagram shows how connected and how central Peter Fox's work was what we were doing. Now, I have to say that I am a mineralogist. And so my approach to this is the disciplined scientist interested in some basic problems. So why would, first of all, you be interested in mineralogy in the first place? Well, first, mineralogy has so many basic. Can I move this? Yes, I can. I hope I haven't had that on the screen the whole time. Anyway, minerals, they're the essential raw materials for technology and agriculture. They're part of our everyday lives and virtually every material that you work with, including your own bodies. Minerals also preserve this incredible record of planetary history, 4.5 billion years of history. Minerals are the tangible surviving results of that long period of evolution, including biological evolution. We wouldn't know about the history of life if it weren't for minerals. Minerals also have laid a very fundamental foundation for solid state physics, for chemistry, the periodic table, X-ray diffraction, many, many different important discoveries, including quite a few that have led to Nobel Prizes, are the consequence of study of minerals. And a reason that all of us in mineralogy know and is just that these are incredibly beautiful natural objects. They're astonishingly diverse. Go to your local mineral museum, just revel in the beauty of these natural productions. Okay, and so the conclusion of my talk is going to be that mineral informatics and data-driven discovery are transforming the science of mineralogy, really in a way that is so fundamental that I think it would be hard-pressed to find another discipline that is so changed. And I'll show you why that's true in just a couple of minutes. So what are our objectives? We're trying to document the evolution of Earth through its mineralogy. We want to compare Earth with other planets and moons. So planetary science is very much invested in mineralogy. We want to understand the co-evolving geosphere and biosphere. And it turns out that minerals and life have played an incredibly important cooperative role. Minerals played fundamental roles in the origin of life. Life has played a fundamental role in the origin of minerals. This is a really interesting story. And all of these discoveries rely on large and growing deep time data resources. So I need to do a shout out to some of my colleagues. Bob Downs at the University of Arizona founded the RUF database. This is the list of all 5,700 plus mineral species. It has filters. You can search in chemistry. We've built a evolution database, which gives the ages of different minerals from different localities. That's one database. Jalian Ralph at mindat.org has done an amazing job. He started this all by himself, but now there are thousands of people around the world who participate in building this data resource of 300,000 mineral localities and 1.2 million mineral locality pairs. There's also Kirsten Leonard with EarthChem, and there's so many data resources that we rely on to do our work. Now, let me take a step back. I've been talking about mineral species, and I want to explain what that is, because this really is at the heart of why data-driven discovery is so important and why it has been ignored by mineralogists. A mineral is naturally occurring, and ideally, a mineral species is defined with a fictive, an idealized M-member composition, like quartz is SiO2, and it has an idealized crystal structure, in this case, the crystal structure of quartz. So what it means is this traditional approach discards all of the information-rich attributes of what I consider to be messy natural minerals. Minerals are incredibly information-rich systems. And so what we're doing now is exploring an alternative approach, an evolutionary system of mineralogy that embraces all the data that's associated with each specimen. And what we're trying to do is identify what we're calling mineral natural kinds, what philosophers of science have called genuine divisions of nature. What we argue is that these mineral species actually can often be divided into different kinds. So here's the mineral pyrite, and there's low temperature pyrite, and there's high temperature pyrite, and there's biogenic pyrite. And you can look at those attributes, dozens of compositional and isotopic and other attributes of minerals, and do different kinds of cluster analysis and show, even with very simple things like PCA, you can show that there are different types of pyrite. And this is our approach, embracing all the data, the richness of data from mineral systems. And when we do this, we find that some IMA species, the official species, should be split into several natural kinds. Some other IMA species should be lumped. And then there's a whole bunch of things that aren't classified. They don't have crystal structures, and yet they're very important earth materials. And I'll show you what I mean. Think about diamond. Diamond's pure carbon. Diamond has the diamond crystal structure, and ideally it can be described with just a few bits of information. But in nature, we find pre-solar diamonds that are 5 billion years old. We find mantle diamonds that are 500 million years old. We find impact diamonds that can be 50,000 years old, and they're quite different from each other in terms of their various characteristics. We argue that these are 3 different natural kinds of diamond. On the other hand, here's a mineral tourmaline. Tourmaline, there's over 30 different species that are approved because of the different compositional variations. And you see those compositional variations manifest in the different colors across a single tourmaline crystal. So it turns out one of these crystals might have 3 or 4 different tourmaline species. We say, no, it's just one natural kind. So in this case, we lump different species together to make natural kinds. And then there's natural volcanic glass, there's coal, there's different kinds of very fine-grained materials that traditionally have been ignored by mineralogy, and yet they're incredibly important. And case in point is you go to Mars, and some Mars sediments contain up to 70% amorphous materials. Well, if you don't consider those as being part of the geology of Mars and treat them as a mineralogist would, then you're missing a big part of the story of Mars's history. So we think these are changes that are needed in describing mineralogy. And so what Shauna Morrison and I have been doing is develop this evolutionary system of mineralogy, and we're doing it partly with network graphs. So here's what we're doing. We're tying a kind of mineral, in this case graphite, to a way that it forms, supernova type 2, or moissanite, silicon carbide, in an AGB star. And you can illustrate this with a bipartite network graph where some of the nodes represent the way things form, AGB stars or type 2 supernovas. Other nodes, the little diamonds there, represent different minerals like moissanite or graphite. And here we have a bipartite graph in which every node representing a star is linked to at least one mineral, and every node representing a mineral is linked to at least one kind of star. And then we can expand this. Part 2 of our system looks at the earliest solar nebula, what's called primary condensation. And in that case, we start adding formation mechanisms. That gives us a new kind of node representing a planetary nebula, that little blue cloud there, and that's linked to other new minerals as well as some of the minerals that we saw before. And we can expand this to interstellar clouds where we now have ices like CO2 and methane ice deep in the nebula. And you can keep going. We now have parts 3, 4, and 5 published or in press. And these cover all the different kinds of minerals that are found in meteorites, about 300 different kinds of minerals altogether. And now the network graph expands because we're adding different kinds of meteorite minerals, including the alteration products by thermal and aqueous alteration and impacts and so forth. So this takes us all the way through the first few million years of nebular history before Earth formed as a planet. But when you go beyond that, then you start talking not about a few hundred minerals, but several thousand minerals. And I realized what we had to do is build a data resource. And so what did I do on my COVID break for 6 months, working up to 10 hours a day, every day, 7 days a week? I started building a very large data resource, which has 5,649 minerals as rows and 57 different ways that minerals form, what we call paragenetic modes, as columns. There are about 12,000 different combinations of minerals and paragenetic modes here. That required going through the literature, paper by paper, page by page. It was a huge job, but because we could do that, we can now make the bipartite network graph of all mineralogy. This is produced by Anirudh Prabhu, working with Shauna Morrison and myself. This is an incredible graph. It is a visualization of all of Earth's mineral through 4.5 billion years. And we are going to, in the future, color this graph according to different attributes of minerals, their ages, their compositions, whether they occur in Mars or not, all sorts of different attributes, and explore mineralogy in a totally new way. You can already see some trends in the center part of this, very dense edges and nodes. This is where you have minerals that are linked to lots of different ways of formation. They form in many different ways. And that's in contrast to the periphery of this diagram, with these fans of minerals that form in only 1 or 2 different processes. And so you get this very distinctive topology of the network, of the bipartite network. Very exciting work. So with this, I conclude. As you saw before, mineral informatics and data-driven discovery are transforming the science of mineralogy. And I have to say that this is the legacy of Peter Fox. This would never have happened if the Deep Carbon Observatory hadn't insisted that I work with Peter, and that he seduced me. Over the last 8 years, he changed the way I see discovery in science, process of science, and particularly my field of mineralogy. I miss Peter so much every day. It's just hard to believe that he's gone, but in a sense, because of his incredibly wonderful students and colleagues, his legacy will continue for many decades to come. And I'm so grateful that I was able to share in that portion of it. And with that, I thank you very much and pass the screen back over to Ahmed. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Bob. Fascinating as always. You never disappoint. I'm very grateful for you showing up here, because I know that you're one of the very few people who are uniquely positioned to speak to Peter's influence and his achievements. I wanted to ask you a question. You spoke to some insights that it seems may not have been pursuable otherwise, besides building these data resources, as you mentioned. Things like natural kind that categorization that you're looking at, and the star, specifically the stellar data. Can you tell us how these insights might have been directly influenced by the availability of data and visualization tools?
None of this is possible without the incredible data resources that Bob Downs and Jolyon Ralph and Kirsten Leonard and others have put together. I mean, it wouldn't have even been conceivable to do this. As it is, I said it took 6 months of 7 days of work, many, many hours a day to put together that one data resource. But that data resource would have taken 10 times or 20 times longer if I had to just go into the primary literature. So these are just indispensable resources, but we're just at the very beginning, because mineralogists simply have not thought about minerals as multidimensional systems. I take a mineral specimen that I collected last weekend, and you look at an object like this. This has a history. And the history is tied in all the non-idealized objects. That's why we talk about natural kinds. Natural kinds mean you're not looking to idealize nature and have some kind of fictive idealized entity, but rather you're saying, here's the real thing, and there's hundreds, literally hundreds of attributes we could assign to this specimen that tells us something about how it formed. Peter is the one who gave us that realization. I mean, it's maybe obvious to everybody else who's listening, but to mineralogists, we were steeped in the idea of idealization, because that's how you win Nobel Prizes. And physics and chemistry have to be this purity and the perfect structure and the perfect compositions and so forth. Mineralogy should be storytelling. And it's that storytelling that requires data, multidisciplinary data, multivariate data. It's really extraordinary how Peter changed the way we thought about it. And Ahmed, you played a big role in that too. I have to say, you came up with the very first network diagram of minerals back in one of our datathons, 6 years ago? That was a profound change. I mean, mineralogy will never be the same. But you were there, you led us in the right path, and how grateful are we all to you.
Thank you so much, Bob, and brilliant talk as always. I would encourage everyone, if they have questions, for Bob, to still put them in the chat or go to our Slido Q&A, and because after post our both speakers, we will have time for a discussion. And also, if there are any questions that pop up during both talks, we'll get to them afterwards. Thanks again, Bob. And I would like now to introduce our next distinguished speaker. Very excited, actually, to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Marshall Ma. Dr. Ma is an assistant professor of computer science at the University of Idaho. He received his PhD in Earth System Science and Geographic Information Science from the University of Twente in the Netherlands in 2011. He then completed postdoctoral training of data science at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. And that is where I had the honor and pleasure and privilege of working with Marshall on many projects. His research focuses on deploying data science in the semantic web to support cross-disciplinary and scientific discovery with broad interests in participatory knowledge engineering, data interoperability and provenance, and visualized exploratory analysis of big and small data. With that, Marshall, let's take it away.
Ahmed, can you see my screen? Just a moment.
Take your time.
Yep. Seems something is wrong. Give me just one moment. Can you still see my screen?
You can see your background.
Just a background, right? Okay,
yes.
Let me play the PPT slides.
You can see your slides.
I think it's up now, right? Okay.
Yes, it is. Thank you, Marshall.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Ahmed, for your introduction. It's really a big pleasure to give a presentation in a session to honor Professor Peter Fox. My talk will be about our experience working together with Peter and some of our recent work on how to successfully apply X-informatics, that use case-driven iterative approach in the informatics work at different disciplines. So let me begin with how I first met with Peter. I think that's back to the year of 2010 when I was still a PhD student in Netherlands as part of Europe. I first gave a presentation in a session chaired by Peter and other colleagues. That's in the May of 2010. And then immediately, I think just after 2 or 3 months, in August, I saw Peter again in a small workshop organized by Christine Ersch with the One Geology Europe project. And immediately, between me and Peter, we saw, maybe we share some really common research interests. That's why we can meet so frequently just in those 3 months. So besides attending those sessions in the meeting at Berlin, we also had some separate chats and talks about the work we are doing, and then the research interests, and then the future work. And then naturally, after I graduated in 2012, I joined Peter's lab at Rensselaer Polytechnic as a postdoc. Actually, before I went to RPI, I already read some papers, chapters written by Peter. And that's why when I first met him in Vienna and in Berlin, I called him, actually I talked with him, I said, oh, you are my silent advisor. Although we have never met before, I've already read a lot of papers you wrote, and I already learned a lot from you. So I will call you my silent advisor. I still remember, it's a quick flashback in my brain. I still remember the first meeting I had with Peter in his office in the Winslow building. And Peter said, oh, from now on, I will no longer be a silent advisor, right? So here on this slide, and also the next, you can see some really eye-opening concepts I learned from Peter, either before I met him and also after I joined his lab as a postdoc. I will begin with the semantic web. So this is 3A. Anyone can see anything on any topic. And then for data science, if you really want to see the highlights, I will say interoperability of data sets, interactivity between people, and then intercreativity in scientific discoveries. And then from our experience with the X-informatics, I think our one sentence conclusion for X-informatics to bring the right information to the right person in the right context. So that's a very pragmatic way to explain X-informatics. But after I joined RPI, especially the Tethys World Constellation, that's a small institute in the Winslow building, I kind of understand more or understand deeply about why they have 3 professors in the same institute. On the left, this Venn diagram, you can see the expertise background of Peter, Professor Jim Handler, and also Professor Deborah McInnes. So a lot of those concepts and ideas you see in this Venn diagram, actually you can see now they are very popular in data science and then data-driven studies in different disciplines. But if you look back, when they first draw this diagram, that's back to almost 15 or 16 years ago. So they are real pioneers in this domain, data science, and then X-informatics, and then semantic web. So after I joined with Peter's lab, we have done a number of successful applications of semantic web and data science and also data management to research projects in different disciplines. And then another important lesson I learned from Peter is build a framework instead of systems. So the systems here means we have everything. We have algorithms, we have data sets, we have functions, we have workflows, we have everything set up for the end user. But Peter's advice is don't do that. There are many reasons. So first, this will cost a lot of time and efforts. But then on the end user side, maybe a lot of functions are just not so useful for them. So his first advice to me is build a framework. Here, the framework means building blocks, like some fundamental algorithms, set up a good framework or foundation for the data quality, like using knowledge graphs, ontologies to cleanse the data environments, build algorithms, and then use workflow platforms, provide them to the end user. They will have a way to efficiently use them. So don't provide everything to them. That will be sometimes not so useful and will waste time and efforts. So he also told me this triangle you see on the right part, the central right part. Either in knowledge engineering either in software engineering, either in application development, take care about those three elements. Express the meaning of data set, express the meaning of functions in the app. And then you need to consider how people will implement them, and also you need to consider the future, how to maintain them. So it's like a triangle. Sometimes they can be struggling between one or two or three items. Sometimes between the data science expert and then the end user domain scientists like Bob, mineralogists, geologists, or biologists. They can be some struggling. But as a data science expert, we need to have this kind of background knowledge in our minds and then get ready for those complex real world situations. So that's why I think in almost all of our research and applications in those different projects, finally we come to this approach for knowledge engineering or informatics engineering. We call it a use case driven iterative approach. I believe Anirudh, Ahmed, and other people at Technics World Constellation, and also all those collaborators or colleagues of Peter, you have heard about this approach, this use case driven iterative approach. I think it's a very useful way to bring data science down to earth in the real world application. It's a good way to balance the background and the needs and the expertise between data managers, programmers, data science experts, and then domain scientists. So here I want to show you two successful applications I did with Peter and other colleagues. The first is the Global Change Information System. It's a part of the US Global Change Research Program. The short name is USGSAPI. USGSAPI is a federal program mandated by the Congress. I think a very important product of USGSAPI is every 4 or 5 years, there will be a formal national climate assessment report. I read on the website, USGSAPI has a really big federal investments every year. In the past 10 years, every year the federal investment in USGSAPI is about $2.5 billion US. So that means every 4 or 5 years, there will be a report. And you can see the report is about 800, 900, or 1,000 pages. So on average, each page of this report represents about 10 million federal investments. That's just one way to describe it. But from another angle, we can see this report contains a lot of investments, research activities, outputs, data sets, organizations, and researchers. And then in the third round of the National Climate Assessment, that's back to 2012, and also actually in the year 2014, USGSAPI set up a program called a Global Change Information System to capture provenance in the National Climate Assessment. The purpose is to provide reliable and authenticated information to the end users, including decision makers in the government, scientists in different organizations, and also the general public. So at that time, our aim is in this trend from transparency to reproducibility, from traceable sources, data, to the processes and the tools. I think this resonates with a lot of ideas we discuss in all this open data, open software, and open science. But my role in this research is draw this conceptual map and then create RDF code for the GCS ontology. I still have the fresh idea because that's the first time I use CMap tools to draw this diagram. I still remember how Peter corrected my diagram. He told me, okay, use round corner box for classes, and the normal box for instances in such a conceptual map. We use the W3C Provenance ontology, and then we run several rounds of use case analysis. I think we have run about 8 or 10 use case analysis. And finally, we have a version of the GCS ontology. I'm very happy. Actually, yesterday, I went back to the GCIS website again, data.globalchange.gov, and I can see it's still in active use in this GCIS portal. And I think now people are working on the 5th round of national climate assessments. I think in a couple of months, we're going to see the provenance for the NCA 5, the 5th national climate assessment. The second work I want to mention is the deep carbon observatory data science. Bob already talked a lot of details about the work we did for this. But here I just want to address 2 points. We've developed a lot of data management and data science infrastructure work. We have also organized boundary activities between data scientists and the geoscientists and also bioscientists. To me, the most important outputs are 2 parts. The first is the agile style approach for data science derived from that use case driven iterative approach. And the second is the community. And then the community with the changed culture of data science. And that also lasts to nowadays, as Bob mentioned, there is now a deep time data-driven discovery community, the 4D community. So we are still using the legacies from DCO data science in our current research. Next, I will quickly show you 2 ongoing research. The first is the NSF-funded project called Deep Time Knowledge Space. Actually, this one is directly derived from the DCO data science. Our aim is to build a knowledge space, so a number of knowledge graphs, ontologies, and vocabularies to capture the time concepts from both global and regional geological time scales. And then we're going to incorporate temporal topology from the W3C time ontology. And then we're going to use this knowledge base to explore and interact with a number of databases, including EarthCam, MindDat, and also the paleobiology database. And after that, we're going to build some reusable notebooks in Jupyter to see how we can do some data analysis with multiple databases. And the second work ongoing is a very new NSF funded project. This one is actually really big. It's a 4-year, $6 million investment from NSF. And actually this one is derived from the US GSRP. So in 2016, US GSRP released that report about impacts of climate change on human health. Because I've worked with Peter on global change information system. So I noticed this report, I read it, and I got some ideas about how to use big data to tackle the complex dynamics between climate change, land use change, ecosystems, and then tick population, pathogens of tick-borne disease, and then the human health. So that's why in 2019, we tried to set up a team between University of Idaho and the University of Nevada, Reno, and Dartmouth College. And then in 2020, we successfully got this proposal awarded from NSF. And now we are working on this project. And the big part of it, again, is using that agile style iterative approach to facilitate the collaboration between scientists from different disciplines. As you can see in the diagram on the right, we have a big team of scientists, and they are from so different disciplines. And we really need an efficient way to facilitate the discussion, communication, and collaboration between them. So finally, to end my presentation, I want to say for the future of X-informatics. If you want to ask me the biggest challenge, I will say the biggest challenge is still we need an efficient way to bridge the gap between data scientists and then the X scientists, the domain scientists, because we are all trained as in a very domain specific background. And now if we have a data-driven research topic, how to efficiently collaborate and understand the needs of each other and then work on the focus topic. We need some approaches. So absolutely the lessons, the skills I learned from Peter can be used in those works. And finally, I want to show you a photo. This is a photo some people took at my farewell party when I left RPI in 2016 to join University of Idaho. So my ending is like this. We are here today to honor a colleague, a mentor, and a friend. Peter is gone, but his knowledge, his kindness, and his friendship are still in or around us. It's hard for me to express how I appreciate the 4 years' time starting with Peter. He helped guide me to a lot of fresh ideas and helped me grow in the field of geoinformatics. In my understanding, X-informatics is still a domain in its young age, and there are a lot of tremendous potentials to be explored in the future. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Marshall. Again, you never disappoint. It's always wonderful, listening, hearing to your talks, and they're always so information dense that that there's bound to be. I have some questions, and I hope the audience have some questions for you as well. And I hope the audience have realized, the broad, broad influence of Peter across different aspects of even data science and informatics, of both working directly with domain scientists on analyzing observational data and drawing conclusions and comparisons and publishing papers, but at the same time, a huge influence or emphasis on building up the infrastructures that will make that a repetitive and process that you can replicate. Marshall, I just wanted to ask you very quickly on, becoming a professor and having students of your own now. How easy do you think it is or has become for someone who is, comes from a specific domain expertise to be onboarded into data science or informatics? Speaking from your particular expertise, specifically your experience.
Yeah, thanks, Ahmed. I think now I'm efficiently use what I learned from Peter in the advising of my own students. I think Peter set up 2 rules. So one is his personality. He's really kind and he's really friendly to students. That's one thing, okay? Set up a really inclusive, friendly atmosphere in the lab or among the group members. But then another part is he has very clear objectives and goals and the timelines for your work. So for example, between me and Peter, we meet about bi-monthly, every 2 months, we have a short meeting. Normally I will bring up a number of outputs from our previous meeting, these outputs from the action items, and then we set up the timeline for the next 2 months. What is his anticipation? And what will be the action items for me, either for our research projects or for the publications or for some proposals or just for some research ideas. So 2 parts. One part, be friendly, be kind to your students, okay? Set up a really flexible and friendly atmosphere for the group, so they can work happily. But then another part is you really need to make it clear about the goals and your anticipation for them, so they know what to do, and then they know what they need to present to you after 2 months, or after 1 week, after 2 weeks.
Absolutely, thank you, Marshall. And as Susan says, it really is an inclusive and friendly culture that Peter built up, and that included all of us. And as far as I could tell, many, if not most, of the people on in the meeting. Well, thank you so much, Marshall. Thank you, Bob. Thank you both for great talks. I'd like to, ask the audience to give you all a couple of minutes. As I mentioned, we will have breakout rooms that you can jump into. I've broadly thought of them as 3 questions. First of all, lessons learned from X-informatics, some of the things that maybe Bob and Marshall spoke to today, specifically about this interaction between domain and data expertise and domain knowledge. But also, I'd like to hear from the experts. There might be currently science questions that are thought that could be resolved or investigated and requires particular data resources or technologies and so on. And at the same time, there are upcoming, or there are new data and information technologies, computational technologies and such, that could be beneficial to current science questions. But I'd also like the audience to, if you have an idea for a breakout room you'd like to suggest it, we'll be glad to take those requests as well. And we could possibly create rooms on the fly. So please take a couple of minutes and let us know what you think. Okay.
While people are thinking about other topics for breakout rooms, I saw a question from Mark Parsons looking for a little bit more about how a framework is different than a system and why that matters. And I love that question and would love to have a little more in depth on that.
Absolutely. That's Marshall, earlier in your talk, you alluded to frameworks rather than systems. Could you speak, at least out of your experience, how that manifested and what decisions one might make, and when you might make such a decision as to you pursuing a framework as opposed to a system?
Yeah, I think a system basically means everything is there. The databases, and then the algorithms for the data analysis, and then the functions that deploy those algorithms and then make collections to the data set, and then output some diagrams or spreadsheets to the end user. And then normally you can see an app or a program or a software program. Basically, it's like everything is already there, and then you just present them to the end user. Before I began my PhD study, I had some experience working as a software engineer in a company. So I know it will take a lot of time to set up such a program, because you need to take care not only the database, the algorithms, but also the user interface, especially the graphic user interface, how to make it user-friendly, and then so people can use it. So that takes a lot of efforts. But a framework basically means you don't need to really collect all those things up. I think instead you can focus on the building blocks. So small items. And actually when you put this into practice, it's very important to avoid the idea to build a comprehensive system for the end user. I think that is also why that use case driven approach is very important. So before you develop the building blocks, or in other words, before you put them together in a system, you need to hear the requirements. And sometimes you really need to understand the scientific questions from your collaborator, from the domain scientists. And after that, you can begin the development. And also, when we use it, we normally make it an iterative approach. So small use cases, and then one after another. And that's why you can see in the GCIS ontology and also the prototype for the GCIS, we've run about 8 or 10 rounds of the use case analysis. And then each round, we make a small progress in the knowledge graph or on the data management part, like the faceted browser, or on the graphic user interface. I think that is so. I think hopefully that help explain the difference between frameworks and the systems. Yeah, framework basically means only in a short sentence. Framework basically means building blocks that the end user can really use in their scientific discoveries. So avoid useless development.
That's a great point, especially for all of us data folks. And you know, a good point from Ken Casey also in this vein is thinking of systems as having you know, predefined entry and exit points, while frameworks are more loosely coupled with components and services that can be linked together in many different ways. And again, frameworks are in that sense more flexible and capable of adapting to solve slightly different research problems. Thank you very much, Marshall. Bob, there's a question for you that I see you've answered, but could you tell us a little bit more just about some of the research that you know is ongoing that utilizes some of the same methods, but rather than mineralogy in, for example, genomics? I know we've been part of common projects.
Sure. So we started with a DCO, and this has been ongoing. A group of microbiologists, geochemists, environmental geologists, and people thinking about deep time. The idea was to look at microbial communities and their metagenomics, particularly looking at the distribution of what are called oxidoreductase proteins. These are the ones that use electron transfer reactions, which might be involved in redox type couples. And we felt that those types of microbial communities may have evolved through time, that early in Earth history, there may have been more reducing environments, but some of those reducing environments exist on Earth today. And we might get hints about the evolution of proteins by looking at the metagenomics of these communities, but you have to tie that to geochemistry, you have to tie it to environmental geology. So Donato Giovanelli at Naples, Joy Buongiorno at Tennessee, Shauna Morrison at Carnegie, the group from the Enigma NASA team at Rutgers are all involved in this. And so it's a growing, someone asked if there's a website or some kind of link, and I honestly don't know that right now, whether they have anything out there, but this is an ongoing effort, which is really exciting. But ultimately, one can imagine this becoming a huge approach, which is not unlike what some people are trying to do with the human gut genome, where again, there's very, very large amounts of genomic data that are being tied to gut environments and human health and diet and all sorts of things. I mean, these are really, really exciting directions to pursue. And I think Peter's influence can be felt in many of these communities.
Thank you, Bob. Yes, definitely the interdisciplinary nature of X-informatics lends itself to, you know, application in many domain areas and across domain areas. Actually, some of the more exciting work that I've worked on under Peter was, you know, integrating data sets from different domains at different scales and finding a way to actually visualize that and get some useful information out of it and insights. Well, thank you both. I'm looking at other questions coming in, but I'd encourage you to also jump onto the breakout rooms if that is currently available.
Yep, I have not seen any other suggestions for specific breakout rooms, so I put them in the chat and I will open them shortly. So we have lessons learned from X-informatics, new opportunities in data and informatics, and new opportunities in science. I will open those rooms and you can go wherever you would like. If you want to leave a room, you can come back. Mark, I see your hand.
Yeah, sorry, I think I missed how to recommend breakout topics, but
You
this
can just say
framework,
it out loud if you'd like.
I am saying it out loud right now.
All
This framework system theme that Marshall brought up, I think that's a topic. If people
Gotcha. Consider it added, and I will open those rooms. We'll leave them open for y'all for about 25 minutes, and then I'd love for everyone to return to the main room for the conclusion of the session.
If I could share one thing before everyone heads off, just some comments really from y'all, actually from Sky and from Denise about Peter really, you know, he focuses on teaching you how to think about your problem rather than ever telling you how to solve your problem. And that's, and there's a real, there's a real value there, obviously that, you know, made us all, connected us all to him. But perhaps also that is something about frameworks versus systems, is so learning how to think about solving your problem in a methodical way, and iterating your solution over time and over expertise until you get something useful. So glad to collect some questions and discussions from the breakout rooms, and see you all in a bit.
So the breakout rooms are open. If you go to the bottom of your screen, you can click on breakout rooms and it should open up a menu where you can choose the room you'd like. If any of you are in the browser version and you cannot access that, if you just say in chat which room you would like to join, I will be happy to put you there. Framework versus systems is very popular.
It's a profound question, and I'm sure it also touches on so very many different aspects of doing science.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, you're still recording.
That's okay.
Where is the breakouts?
So I think they're ongoing, and I hope everyone is enjoying them, and that they go on, you know, have your conversations even beyond the scope of them, or even beyond the meeting itself. But in summary, I just wanted to thank everyone for being here, and especially the family members who have been here. I hope we've made you know, a good tribute, put together a good tribute to Peter. Obviously, for me and for many others, his you know, the value of knowing him in our lives will go on. It's not something that we can summarize in a session, but I am personally, at least, am exceedingly grateful for all the connections that he helped me make across all these different communities at ESIP, AGU, and otherwise. For me personally, it has changed my life, moving from Egypt, coming to the US. He has, and for that, I'll be always grateful. Thank you all for joining me on this, and have a wonderful rest of your days.
Thank you, Ahmed. Thanks so much for all you've done.
Thank you, Ahmed.
Huge props to Ahmed. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks so much.
See you.
I want to save the chat.
Thank you, Ahmed, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Well done, young man.
Very well done, Ahmed. You did great.
Yes, indeed you did, Ahmed. That was very great.
Hey, Ruth.
Hi.
Like teacher, like student. Yeah, you like your teacher, Peter.
Thank
Great
you so
job.
much.
Thank you.
It's you know, since the moment I you know, thought of it, Susan and Megan have been, and Denise, they've been with me throughout, all the way. And so really this is thanks to them. I'm happy to host anytime.
Well, talk to you tomorrow.
Yep. Bye, Ruth.
All right, good night.
Good night, everyone. See you, Ahmed.
Good night.